So, morning everyone. Last Wednesday, Pastor Benny shared a message from Romans chapter 8, from verse 31 to 39, and I was thinking a little bit about that, and I thought maybe we could look at that, look back at some of the things he said from a perspective of fear, and I think I just wrote down some of the points that he made where, and he talked about how God gave me his very best when I was still his enemy in his son. And then God now has an uncaused, unalterable attitude towards me because of his love and his care. And as a result of this, in verse 37, if you look in Romans chapter 8, verse 37, we see that we are more than conquerors. We are more than conquerors in our trials. And another point that Pastor Benny made is he talked about how God has given us the power to spoil the enemy, how to leave the battle with spoils from the enemy. And I was thinking about this with regard to Job's life. And I was thinking, how did Job leave with the spoils of victory? See, if you look at the book of Job, to me the book of Job, it's a book of loss. It's a book of anger. Job is angry with God. It's a book of trying to explain what's happened, what's going on. It's a book of trying to find a cause, all the way from probably, I think, chapter 3, going until just before God speaks. And if you look at Job 3, it's very interesting. In Job 3, verse 25, it says Job had a fear. I'm just going to turn over there. Job had a fear of losing what God had blessed him with. I don't know if those were his material blessings. Probably, being a father, maybe he was afraid of losing his kids. But in Job chapter 3, let's read that verse. Job is speaking and he says, "For the thing that I greatly feared has come upon me, and what I dreaded has happened to me." So what do you fear today? What is your deepest fear? Maybe you fear a job loss and not being able to provide for your family. Maybe you fear losing your children. Maybe you fear losing your spouse. Maybe you fear losing your health. Right? All of us have fears. And I think there are many people in the Bible who were in similar situations. I believe Naomi feared being alone. In Ruth 121, when she comes back with Ruth, she's come back with someone with someone who was part of her family, and yet, despite that, in Ruth 121, she says, "I've come back empty." Right? So, I believe Ruth had this fear of being alone. I think Peter might have feared what he might become without Jesus. Of all the disciples, we see him as often as the one who most violently opposes Jesus going to the cross. Both in Matthew 16:21 to 22, he is the one who tells Jesus. He says, "No, Lord, you're not going to go to the cross." And then later in John chapter 18, verse 10, he's the one who takes out his sword and cuts off the ear of Malchus. Right? And I think that he may have feared what he might become without Jesus. How does God respond to our fears? What does God do with our fears? God actually then takes us into that very situation that we feared to release us from that fear. Right? And in that situation is where I discover that God has really committed himself to caring for me without any condition and without any requirement. Right? And we have so many, if you look through the Bible, there are so many verses where God speaks again and again, "Fear not, do not fear, fear not, fear not." So many verses, so many times. I just picked up a few. He reassures Joshua in chapter 1, verse 9, and the nation, and he says, "Fear not, I will go with you." And then in Isaiah 41, verse 3, he says, "Fear not, I will help you." Right? In the New Testament also, a couple of verses that I picked up where Luke 12:32, and it says, "Fear not, for it is God's good pleasure to give you his kingdom." And then in John 16, verse 33, Jesus is he's speaking to his disciples and he's saying, "Fear not, for I have overcome the world." Fear not, fear not, fear not. God is telling us to fear not. Why fear not? Because God has committed himself to looking after us. God has committed himself in his love for doing that, not because of anything that I do, not because of any particular way that I am living, or what I am doing for him, or what I am not doing for him, or the things that I do, but just because he loves me. Just because he loves me, he will care for me. So let's come back to Job all the way, right? So when God speaks to Job in chapters 38 to 41, and he responds to Job, his response to Job actually is a set of questions. And in those questions, he leads Job through a set of questions where he describes his control of the stars, he describes his control of the weather, and he describes of his care for the animals, from the smallest of animals, from the deer's young in chapter 39 verse 1, to the largest of animals, to the behemoth in chapter 44 verse 20. He shows that he cares for his creation, right? And Job gets the message. Job understands God cares for me, God loves me, and despite the situation that I am going through, even though I don't understand it, I know that God cares for me, right? And when I know that God cares for me, that God cares for me unconditionally, I can let go of my fear, right? And then I can declare, like Job declared in 41 verse 5, he says, "I used to hear of you, but now I see you, Lord," right? And then like Peter, when I see Jesus back on the shore of the lake, of the Sea of Galilee, I fling off my coat, I jump into the sea, I know he's come back for me, right? And then is when people, like it happened to Naomi in chapter 4, people will then call us blessed, right? Because we know that God cares, we know that God cares for us, we know that God cares for us unconditionally. And that, I believe, is how we become more than a conqueror. That, I believe, is how I am able to leave with the spoils. I am able to leave with the spoils of Satan, because earlier he had control of me through this fear that I had. But now that fear is gone, that fear is taken away. And I, by allowing God to work a process in me, God has, the process he has worked out in me, now I have plundered the enemy of that fear. And I can live a life that is filled with the joy of God. So, pray you have a great day. Pray that you have a blessed week. Thank you for your patience. God bless you.